there's kind of some major shifts going on in drug markets globally now. So a lot of the focus has been on illicit drug crops that are cultivated, and these crops have important distributional effects. They keep they're labor intensive, and they coca in Colombia. It's been absolutely central to the rural economy there. But there has been a shift now increasingly to synthetic drugs. And that is going to kind of really transform the, drug economies. So we can see this in Afghanistan now. We can see this in Mexico. We can see this in Myanmar, the growth of synthetic drugs, methamphetamine, also fentanyl. And that also has the potential to really undermine the kind of the base of rural economies that have relied upon drug crop production.
What sort of spurred this rise in synthetic drugs?
Well, technological change. I mean, it's has been a significant part of it. I mean, I think so. For instance, in Myanmar, and that's not my primary area of expertise, but militias in the borderlands of Myanmar have increasingly got involved in the production of methamphetamine. I think a lot of it was happening across the border in Thailand, and increasingly attempts to regulate it and stop it in Southeast Asia meant it became increasingly concentrated in Myanmar. And so now that's controlled by a number of armed groups, militias, border guard forces, and there's a very guaranteed market across the border in China and also into Australia. In the Middle East, captagon has become a major, another kind of synthetic drug has become a major source of income for armed groups, and it changes the dynamic because drug crops involves many people, and armed groups, in order to regulate those processes, they need to negotiate with communities, and so there's some kind of form of social contract that develops in some shape or form. Whereas with captagon, with methamphetamine, you just need a small laboratory that's mobile, that can move around. You're not dependent on populations, and so it's in some ways it's more predatory, but also more lucrative. So it's kind of reshape kind of the politics of these kinds of marginal spaces.
So do you think that's going to affect the effects of development that illicit economies had, that these benefits that you mentioned employed a lot of people and etc.? Do you think that switch, because I imagine also now that with synthetic drugs, you need some sort of knowledge, you need some sort of equipment, not just your average farmer can just get into this.
Exactly.
So how does this affect development?
I mean, I think it's a really good question, and this is very kind of recent, and but one would hypothesize that the benefits are very, very concentrated. So it leads to kind of wealth accumulation amongst a small group of people. And that will then shape also the kinds of political settlements that emerge in these places, because there's less of a need to negotiate. It's not that these, so the armed groups in Myanmar, it's not that they're completely float above society with no relationships with them. They've been operating in these areas for decades. But it's certainly going to change the dynamics of development and political authority in these areas. I mean, there's another so in Myanmar, there's what is happening in these borderlands is what we talk about as agglomerations of illegality. So there's poppy production continues, there's methamphetamines, and increasingly there's a new phenomenon, well, not so new, last 10 years, of scam centers. So these compounds where people are kind of attracted, often under false pretenses, to come and work in these centers, and then they're responsible for online fraud, targeting initially Chinese markets. So, tackling reaching out. It's very sophisticated development of new technologies around cryptocurrency, blockchain, digital wallets, all this kind of stuff. Attracting people in on either through romance or through offering them kind of deals to new investment opportunities, and then running away with the money. So you've got these different kind of forms of illegality going on, which are kind of layered onto each other, and they kind of also create capital that gets invested in could be invested in other forms of illicit economy, or even into licit economies such as rare earth mining. So yeah, it's linked also to the growth of organized crime in a much more kind of consolidated way.